Situated on top of a hill overlooking the picturesque Sussex Weald is our location for today's Antiques Roadshow, Nymans. It's world-renowned for its glorious gardens with rare and exotic plants. But at its heart stands this mysterious ruin. From its facade, you'd think it was medieval and that the decay is down to age and neglect. But you'd be wrong. Because this house was built in the 1920s and it stands as a poignant reminder of a tragedy, a huge fire that destroyed most of it. By the early 20th century, the house had already had a couple of makeovers before Leonard and Maud Messel inherited it in 1915. Maud was not impressed with the look of the house and only agreed to move in if she could make radical changes. The result had the look and feel of a traditional English manor that had evolved over centuries. Like this charming little bookroom, which is also an example of recycling, because Maud was an early salvage hunter, and she liked to use original materials whenever she could. So the panelling outside the bookroom is from a 14th century building. And then this door, 16th century. Unfortunately, no one could foresee that just 15 years later, a fire would ravage it. A typical domestic problem was to blame. Frozen water pipes, would you believe? 1947 was a terrible winter, and a blow lamp was used to try to thaw the pipes, and that's what caused the fire. And then, quick decisions had to be made about what few items could be rescued. One of the choices they had to make was whether to salvage an oil painting by one of the greats, the 17th century artist Velasquez, which was hanging over that fireplace there, or whether to save a portrait of Leonard's mother, of more sentimental value, shall we say. So which one did they go for? Leonard's mother, of course. Who do you think? I wonder what our experts would have made of that. They're already busy welcoming our visitors, so let's see what treasures they uncover.
At first sight, you might be forgiven for not knowing what these actually are.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what they are, don't you?
I do, yes.
What are they?
They are a silver cruet set.
That's right. In the centre, we've got the mustard pot.
Yes.
And on the outside, we've got the pepper and salt.
Yes.
But how did such a really unusual set like this end up with you?
Well, the story is that my husband's great-grandfather had been travelling and he was coming home from Russia. He sent a message saying, I'll be home at such and such a time and I'm bringing with me 3 monkeys. And as it was at that stage quite appropriate to have monkeys as pets, the family went about creating cages for the monkeys to welcome them, and then he arrived with these. So that's all we know, really. I have no idea where he got them, where they originated from, and I don't know how far his travels had taken him.
OK. They have nothing to do with Russia at all.
OK.
They were made in London. And the Victorians were great ones for novelty pieces, particularly in the second half of the 19th century. If we turn one up, we can see it's hallmarked on the bottom, and it's got a date letter here for 1867. So it's quite old. It's got a maker's mark ECB for Edward Brown. Now, I have seen a few others of these sets.
Okay.
And most of them are made by Edward Brown. Now, these are highly sought after. There are a couple of problems with this set. The main one being that down the arm here, we've got an enormous split.
Yes, yes.
Now, luckily, that's probably split up a seam where it was actually made. So that could be fairly easily repaired.
Okay.
But I have to ask you, has anybody ever looked at this and given you any idea about them?
All I do know is my husband is very protective of them, and when we go away, he locks them in a safe. So.
Well, he's on the right lines there, because these are highly sought after, really collectible. So I would think they're going to be worth at least £10,000 to £15,000.
What? Oh, good grief. Wow.
So I think the safe is probably a good place for them.
I think so too.
Fantastic things.
Oh, thank you so much, Alice. That was lovely.
You.
The more I look at this panel, the whole thing starts to move. It's three-dimensional. To me, it's quietly amazing. There must be a really interesting story on your side about it.
Well, this is a panel of Italian intarsia from the 16th century. It was carved by a monk, Fra Raffaele de Brescia, in Bologna, and I think he carved about 35 panels. We've had it in the family for somewhere in the region of 200 years. It must have been one of my great-great-great-grandfathers travelling the world.
So he got this on the Grand Tour?
He must have been, yes, something like that.
Let's just look at it as a whole, because as I say, the whole thing is truly magnificent, bearing in mind that the colours which we see weren't the colours which were in the 16th century,
Of course.
because they faded, but it's still holding some good colours. The groundwood at the top is walnut, and then we've got this lovely flow of marquetry, and then we have yew wood, ebony, oak, ebony. I love the idea of the lute here, is you could almost walk over to it and just pull it out of the cupboard.
Yes.
It's just holding itself out in this three-dimensional manner. Absolutely amazing, really, really clever.
So clever, yes.
Yeah. As we look in the lower section, we have these three little cherries just hanging there, suspended on this line. And further along, we have these two lemons. And in this lower section on the right-hand side here, there's cantaloupe melon. It just works, doesn't it?
It's staggering, yes.
It's one of the best pieces of art I've seen. I'm a furniture dealer, but I look at this as art because it's to me, it's so pleasurable. In my opinion, if you're going to buy this from a good dealer, it would be a high-end art dealer, and this would cost, in my opinion, well in excess of £20,000.
Really, yeah.
This is a serious piece.
Thank you, yes.
It's a pleasure
very
to see.
interesting, thank you very much.
Having been doing this for a very long time, you become sort of visually very acute. And that assemblage is, to me, very offensive.
Not to me.
Not to you?
No, not at all. I love it.
Do you have it like that at home?
Yep, my grandmother had it during the war. Then my mother had it similar, and I've carried on the tradition to have the two of them together with a gorgeous...
Aspidestra.
No, no. Flowers.
That's
a lovely display of flowers in it.
That's what would have been in there when this was made.
Really?
Yeah, this was made in China around 1885, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
And sort of thing that was sold at Liberty's then, in their Oriental basement. And so it's a pot holder.
Aha.
It's painted in underglaze blue with a pattern which is called prunus and cracked ice.
All right.
In spring, the prunus is the first to flower.
Right.
And the petals drop onto the cracked ice, which is breaking up because of spring, and suggest the new year.
That's fantastic. Goodness.
But it didn't start off nice on there. What do you think this is?
I think it's a seat or...
Ah, so not a stand.
Well, possibly not a stand, but it lends itself perfectly to be a stand.
I don't think it does.
You don't?
No, it clashes. The two different... Yes.
Oh.
And the two different patterns don't work together.
No?
You're right, garden seat.
Right.
And the form is actually an Oriental drum.
All right,
And they copied it in porcelain.
Uh-huh.
You've got lotus, scrolling lotus on here, which is Buddhistic. And then here we've got cash, which are coins, suggesting wealth. And then down here, right at the very bottom, we have a sort of bat-like flower arrangement.
Yes.
Anyway, same sort of date. And really, I think they're a very good combination. No, they're not a combination. No. Two. That one about £400 to £600 for that.
Yeah.
And the garden seat, it is actually a very nice one. I would be thinking close to 1,000.
Wow, that is a surprise. Thank you.
Good.
Well, you know, at the end of the day, what I really like is to meet someone like this. Particularly because he's armed with a vast array of bottles behind him. Isn't he marvellous?
Yeah, I love him. I'd love to know who he was.
Might be able to help you with that, but why do you like it?
Oh, well, I love it because it was hung in our dining room when I was a child, throughout my childhood and my teens. And my parents had lots of parties, great parties, and he would always be there presiding over them.
Keeping the party going.
Yeah.
I love it. I just really like the way the light is coming across, especially the jugs in the foreground are so beautifully lit and described, and they're so round, and the space between everything is very articulate. You can almost measure it with a ruler. And he himself, he's heard it all, hasn't he?
Yeah, he's been around the block, hasn't he?
Oh, yeah, he's got a few stories of his own as well. Well, no, it's by Thomas Cantrell Dugdale. He's normally known as a society portraitist, dukes, duchesses, aldermen, terribly important people. And here he is doing a pub landlord. What date do you think it was painted?
I have no idea. I know that Dugdale died in 1952.
Yes, it's got to be before that.
It's got to be before that, yeah, but that's all I know.
I think it's between the wars, don't you? I mean, how's that feel about it?
Yeah.
I think it might be late 1930s. I want it to be late 1930s. And the reason is because that's the date this extraordinary movement called mass observation took place. That's when it started, was in about 1937. Mass observation was started by a group of anthropologists and poets and filmmakers, and the idea was to chronicle the working man across Britain in the form of diaries, films, photographs, and of course paintings. And this has that very much the anthropologist's look. This is Britain, this is working Britain, this is how we live. So I confess I looked it up.
Okay.
Well, I looked it up in the Royal Academy Exhibitors book, and he exhibited a picture in 1937 called At the Jolly Sailor, which sounds to me like a pub.
Yeah.
And I wonder if it's that picture.
Right, okay.
And then I saw on the back that it's got labels from the shippers who used to deal with taking pictures to the Royal Academy and back.
Oh, okay.
James Borley and Son, and their labels on the back. So that makes me think this is an Academy picture. Date's right, title's right, probably is right. Were this a military officer, some boring chap wearing a scarlet uniform, I think he'd probably be worth about £1,000. That would be about right for him.
Right.
But he isn't. He's much, much more interesting. And so I think they paid between £10,000 and £15,000 for him.
My goodness, wow. That's amazing. I mean, I love him, and he's like a member of the family, so he'll be staying.
My husband brought this to me 6 years ago after the birth of my daughter.
He's got impeccable taste. You've got this chick with the egg, which is in enamel. It's in beautiful condition. It's silver and gold, English. I've not ever seen one like it, ever. For me, that is really quite special.
Yeah.
I would say it's got to be in the region of about £2,000.
Oh, wow.
What a wonderful, wonderful jewel
Yeah,
to have.
I love it.
Well, it's incredibly windy here today, but we haven't yet faced the deluge that Noah faced. Now, we've got father and daughter. This wonderful Noah's Ark set, has it been in the family long?
Well, my father, who was born in 1909, he played with it as a boy, along with his brothers. Then my brother and myself played with it.
Yeah.
And then it was passed down to Joanna.
You played with it?
I played with it, yes.
Well, what a
For
careful
many years.
family you must be, because one of the first things that struck me is the amazing condition of all these animals.
We tried our best.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, do you know where this ark might have been made?
Somebody said to me way back, possibly in Germany or Austria, but I really don't know the answer.
The first answer you gave, it's German. The ark was almost certainly made in a place called Erzgebirge, which is in the Ore Mountains. Now, that's where Germany meets Czechoslovakia.
Yes.
It's an area rich in folk art. Arks have been made over hundreds of years. Indeed, they're still made today.
Yeah.
The people of that area of Germany, using pine, made arks from this sort of size up to really monster vessels. This is like the sort of petrol tanker of the, of the Noah's Ark world.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely fabulous. And of course, there on the roof is the dove.
Yes.
Yes.
And the ark was made around 1845, 1850.
Right.
The animals just could be a little bit later, maybe 1870, 1880. But in other words, I think they were already of some vintage before your dad even got them.
Right.
So, now, interestingly, you've also got the papier-mâché biblical figures.
Yes.
It's just so complete. There were cheaper sets, which would be smaller, with obviously crudely carved wooden figures. You've really got the Rolls-Royce of Noah's Arks here, which, in these days would have been very, very expensive.
Yes.
And it's reflected in the quality of the animals.
Yes.
What about value?
Oh,
I
what about value?
I have no idea.
Well, I'll tell you, I've never seen such well-modelled animals. These are large. You've looked after them as a family. The ark's a particularly big one.
Right.
I think in the UK, if this was put up for auction, it should make under the hammer between £5,000 and £8,000. Right. Goodness me. Wow. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's not going to go anywhere, though. We're not going to sell it. We love it very much. So thank you very much.
Well, this is what I call wow glass. Yeah, I love trawling car boots, junk fairs, auctions, and I just came across one day, this one here, I think it's a green one, a car boot sale, a couple of quid, bought it, and then I started to see them everywhere. I've managed to get these 5 here in a matter of kind of 6 weeks. They've just suddenly been appearing out of nowhere.
God, I wish they were bubbling out of the ground in front of me. I mean, they're a kind of cross between a plant and a skyscraper, aren't they? I think the colours are fab.
They are fantastic, yeah.
And there are 2 groups, of course. There are 2 kinds here. You've got these 2. These are patterned, but this is the type that I prefer.
This is my favourite.
Yo.
Obviously. I bought that as part of a lot with other things at an auction, altogether for about £30.
I think I'd pay 30 quid for that, and I'm a really stingy buyer. You know, for me to pay 30 quid for them, I mean, means I gotta want them. So they were made in Empoli in Italy, near Florence, and I've just recently seen the earliest date of them. I had American catalogue, Sears catalogue, 1959, which is this sort.
Oh, really?
And then I think these are maybe as late as the 70s.
Right.
And we kind of know them generically now as bathroom bottles. Because you put them in the window of the bathroom and it gives it colour splash.
Yeah, absolutely.
And contrast with the white tiles or whatever.
Yeah.
I love them. You know, when you've got 10 and they're all doing this, I'm thinking this is the modern world.
No. And I love this one as well because of the ripples on that one.
Yeah.
Which I thought that's quite unique. It's a nice colour.
Yeah, I'm still going for that one.
No, this one is
the one I'm going to have.
This is the one I'm going to keep.
This
is the one I'm keeping.
Oh, no! Yeah, well, you're paying the money there for 30, 40 quid each, and I think it's a great collecting area. Well, you know, colour splash, wow!
Great, thank you very much.
Welcome.
This is a real treat for me. Not only have we got this wonderful backdrop of these fabulous gardens, this magnificent building, but we've got this wonderful clock. It is magnificent. This, believe it or not, would have been the cutting edge of technology, the Hubble telescope of its time. Is this the humble family timekeeper?
Yes, certainly. It was in my parents' dining room for all of my childhood, and we always rather looked up to it. My father wound it every Sunday morning.
And it's been in the family for a long time?
Yes, my grandfather bought it in, I suppose, the 1920s.
If we start at the obvious thing, the name of the clock, you can read the name just along the bottom. It's a little bit obscured, but it's Edward East. Now, Edward East was one of the pioneers of clockmaking. He was born in 1602, he died in 1697, so not only did he survive the plague, the Great Fire of London, but he was also 95 when he died, which is extraordinary. The clock itself dates from around 1675, which is significant because the pendulum was actually invented by Christian Huygens in 1656, but it's not until 1668 that they tweaked it and the long pendulum was introduced. So this clock dates 7 years after that, which to my mind is amazing. What was started off as a humble brass clock, and then transformed into these magnificent pieces of furniture. Given its history, given its importance, its position, and its age, if this clock came up into auction at the moment, you could be looking at between maybe £80,000 to £120,000.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? But all it does is tell the time.
It does a bit more than that.
Yeah.
Feast your eyes on these. They are simply gorgeous, aren't they? It's time for our Changing Fortunes challenge, where we have to decide which of these, in the last 40 years, as long as the Roadshow has been going, has just about held its value, which might have had a bit of wobble, gone up, gone down, and which has gone through the roof. And Joey Hardy, you brought these along as our jewellery specialist. I've got to ask, can I try them on?
Oh, of course.
Oh, good. Oh, good.
Of
Well, let me start with this emerald. Now, talk me through this emerald there. I mean, the green is dazzling, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I mean, it is a particularly fine stone. It's from Colombia. What you're looking for in gemstones is the intensity of colour, and that's what's making you go the wow factor. That's what you really want to see in a gemstone. And it's sort of unlike diamond, you want to have it as clear as possible, but with a gemstone, these inclusions are part of its chemistry and its makeup, and every single one will be unique. You will never find another emerald like that in the world.
Okay, let's move on to the diamond.
A girl's best friend. It suits you very well, madam.
Oh.
This is a 4-carat diamond, and what is so special about diamonds and why they've been so revered for centuries is that because of that adamantine luster, which is the brilliance that's coming from that, the fire and the radiance.
Let's just slip this one on. No, I don't think it'll go on. I'm going to have to put it here slightly awkwardly, but you were talking about saturation and hue. The saturation of the red of this ruby is very deep and hugely pleasing to the eye, isn't it?
Yes, it is. This one is from Burma, and it is the chromium that's inside the makeup of that ruby that is making it glow.
Let me just put that there. So when we're trying to think about not just their utter fabulousness, but in terms of how they might have performed,
there's a lot of different factors that one has to take into account. I mean, over 40 years, you've had political upheavals. You've had ruby deposits that have been found in Mozambique only in the last 10 years. You've had Zambian emeralds that have come on the market, and that affects the demand and the supply and the price.
Are we simply assessing them in terms of the gem, or is there anything you should tell us about the ring or the age of the ring, anything like that?
No, it's purely about
the gem.
Purely about the gem.
Do you know, I think this will probably be the hardest one I will do all series.
Oh, really?
I do,
oh,
I do. Well, because they're
good.
They're so sumptuous.
Yes, they are. They are. And you know, they have all been the king of gems at one stage, but at the moment, one is really king.
I'm inclined to go for the diamond being... Do we think? I'm bolstered by the support I'm getting from all of you. Okay. I'm going to say that the ruby's had a wobble. The emerald has kind of kept its head above water and increased in value a little bit, but not dramatically. And this has gone through the roof.
You couldn't be more wrong.
When you were hesitating, I thought, she's cross because I've got it right. That's what I was thinking. Oh, yeah, you're so chuffed now,
I'm so chuffed, yeah.
You so owe me a drink later
I do,
on.
I'll owe you a drink.
Oh, come on then. All right. So what's the story here?
Well, the white diamond, which has kept with inflation. You've got the emerald, which has done a bit of a wobbly. And you've got the ruby, which has just gone into the stratosphere.
Wow. So why have these gems experienced such changing fortunes then in the last 40 years?
Well, do you know, I think quite simply, it's rarity. The ruby has come from Burma, and very few stones are coming out of Burma these days. They've been mined for 800 years. It's the intensity of the colour that you're really looking for.
And as for the emerald and diamond?
Well, for the emerald, because they're softer, so people have to be a little bit more careful with emerald.
And so perhaps they're not as desirable.
Exactly.
That's clearly not the case with the diamond. So why is that not done very well?
Well, because an emerald and a ruby are rarer than a white diamond.
Simple as that.
Simple as that.
Well, how much I would love to just put these on and take them home. Sadly, I can't. But thank you, Jo, very much. It's been fascinating.
Well, we're all here looking at a really nice collection of early 20th century children's books, some artwork for children's books, and some documents. And they're all united by this name here, Francis E. Hiley. Now, I confess when I came here this morning, I didn't know who Francis Hiley was. Can you enlighten me?
This is my late husband's grandfather, who was a painter and illustrator, and he illustrated for Arthur Conan Doyle in the Strand magazine.
So this would have been when? When was he illustrating for?
1900 and something, I think.
Right, so from the early part of the century up to this one, which is the 1920s.
Yes.
And so these are lovely. I'm sure they're collectible. People do like these kind of things, but this is the one I'm really interested in. The Land of Mist by Arthur Conan Doyle, illustrated, as we said, by Francis Hiley. Now, it's an Arthur Conan Doyle novel. It's not one of the Sherlock Holmes novels, I'm afraid, but actually as interesting, if not more interesting to me. This is one of the late stories where the author was becoming interested in the spirit world, the paranormal, and the possibility of communicating with spirits beyond the grave. It's a short story, and it's fully illustrated. Now, I think we can see immediately that this is a novel about the spirit world. This, I think, is the most graphic and exciting of all the illustrations. This is somebody, Malone advanced and peered, awestruck, into the face of the apparition. "Mother!" he cried. "Mother!" And this wonderful, gauzy apparition of the mother in the background. A really arresting image. And I've seen a couple of others here. This one caught my eye. This does say me, doesn't it?
Yes, and there are several there that talk about different family members that he used as models.
So this gentleman coming out of the train
Is Francis Hiley.
is his self-portrait.
Yes.
I love that. But the real joy of this is, in the front, he has tipped a series of letters by the author himself. This is the little jewel
it is.
we come to. 4 letters by Arthur Conan Doyle. I like this letter. This is addressed from his psychic bookshop and library. "Dear Mr. Hiley, I thought your pictures were quite admirable." It's the pictures we're looking at in the book. "One of them hangs in my museum here, the original, and I should like you to see it there. I hope the episode will direct your attention to God's greatest gift to man, so sadly misrepresented, the possibility of passing the barriers of death. April the 29th, 1926, signed Arthur Conan Doyle." So there must be some sort of commercial value. I think as a group, together, collectors would get quite excited by this.
Right.
There are lots of Conan Doyle items you can buy, but nobody else has these. I think as a group we're looking at £2,500, £3,000.
Gosh.
Congratulations.
A simple form, a simple design, yet the two combined have got so much power. Tell me, how do you come to be the lucky owner of this vase?
Grandparents' inheritance come up through them to my mother and then to myself.
So do you remember it growing up then?
I do.
And who would have been the one to have bought this? Grandma, granddad?
No, would have been my grandfather, I think. Yeah, grandfather.
So sort of explain him to me. Was he quite a smart character?
Yeah, he was, absolutely. Yeah. He used to work for British Airways, did that for about 30 years. And so both him and my grandmother travelled quite a lot, I think, because of that reason. And back then, he still wore a uniform. Like, he almost looked like a pilot, even though he wasn't a pilot. The full, black suit with the gold braid and the cap.
Okay.
Very smart. And that's what I always remember, sort of growing up.
Because it's interesting, thinking of him as sort of a smart individual and them as quite a smart couple.
Absolutely.
You've got to be that kind of person to have bought this. I mean, you've just got that simple, compressed, ovoid shape, but with these etched bulls, one on each side. And actually, the thing I love is the fact that they read individually.
That's what I like about it.
But then they sort of read together.
Yeah, as you look through.
Yeah, you look through and it's almost like, are they fighting each other?
Yep.
The manufacturer is Hadeland.
Yep.
Well, Hadeland are basically Norway's crown of glassmaking. They are the biggest firm for them. They're the firm that really underpins everything that they were doing.
Right.
And this piece is really, for me, right at the top of what they're doing.
Right.
It's incredibly smart. This will have been a considered purchase when they bought it.
Right, okay.
And in real terms, I would actually probably argue Hadeland hasn't quite kept up financially with some of the other big Scandinavian factories that we know.
Right, okay.
Certainly the likes of Orifors and Costa.
Yeah.
But this piece is absolutely brilliant.
Right.
And I think as much as I love it, and as much as you love it, there's going to be a huge queue of other people who will also love it and be more than happy to own it.
Right.
They're not going to get it.
No, they're not going to get it.
Well, okay, let's consider that, but if you had to go out and buy it again, or if someone out there wanted to go and find one, even if you could find one, and I've not seen this model before, I think you're looking at the best part of £500, even £600 for it.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. I should put that on the insurance then, shouldn't I?
In the 1960s, we saw many things, obviously the Beatles, but one of the most important things, I think, was the Wombles. And here is the first edition of the first book by Elizabeth Beresford, This one is actually signed, and it's signed Love to Kate from Mummy and the Wombles, Elizabeth Beresford, the author, who is...
My mother.
Your mother?
Yes,
And then she has a lovely PS here. Bungo is really you in disguise. Hope you don't mind. So what is that all about?
Well, it's because Bungo was the bossy one.
Yes, of course.
And so I feel I was the bossy daughter, because I have a younger brother who was Orinoco, the fat, lazy one, which is the one that all the children really love.
And you've got a lovely picture here of Mummy.
Yes, yes.
Mummy with all the Wombles themselves.
Yes.
This is the first time the Roadshow's had an actual a Womble actually on the show, fully live here in front of us all.
Thank you very much.
Value, I suppose we have to put a value on it. Well, a first edition, I would have thought, a signed copy, a couple of £100, but I'm afraid this one is a very special one.
Yes.
This is to Bungo, £500.
Really? Well, of course, it's going to stay in the family.
I hope so too.
Well, I've seen a few of these boxes in my lifetime, and they always open the wrong way up, which is a good sign to me. So let's do exactly that.
Yes.
And it's a white wood box, and it reveals this vivid sky blue object. And tell me about it with you. What's its history?
Well, I know my mother loved it. I think because she loved blue, and she loved anything that sort of was a bit special.
Yes.
And I think it came down from her great-grandmother. Her great-grandmother was going to be doing something quite special, and I think it was given to her at that time.
Oh, marvellous.
I'm hoping you're going to be able to say roughly what sort of date it is.
Well, I can tell you the date, and of course there's something very much unsaid here, isn't there?
Yeah.
Here it is, not
Yes.
only written in the top of the box, but
Yeah.
it is a full-blown Fabergé object in every sense of the word.
Right, okay.
It's decorated with translucent blue enamel
Yeah.
over what we call a guillochage, which is an
Right.
engine-turned core,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
engraved literally by a machine
Right.
in simulation of silk, really, isn't it? It looks all the
beautiful.
world like
No,
moire
it is-
silk.
It is lovely.
And a pearl in the top,
Yep.
and bound with gold here. And so
Yes.
what is its function?
Well, I was hoping you might be able to tell me.
Well, it's a parasol handle.
Oh, right,
And
okay.
they were sold by Fabergé
Yeah.
in every possible pattern
Right.
and material.
Right.
And Queen Mary was particularly fond of them. And then when they were bought from the jeweller, the great Russian jeweller, the supplier to the court of Nicholas and Alexandra, you could perhaps take them to your own umbrella maker, your own parasol maker, and then they would attach a parasol that was equally sumptuous, made of silk. And they do remain. They're a bit tatty and faded by now, but we do see them.
Yes.
And that was just one tiny part of the arrangements of the owner of this thing. And what we can tell from the hallmark on it, that it dates from 1903 to 1917. And it's a time of great luxury, enormous wealth, and great patronage, and very discriminating patronage. This is actually made by the chief workmaster to Fabergé, who was called Michael Perkin, and he was the maker of the imperial Easter eggs. So what? Yes, it's not too bad, is it? Not too bad at all.
No, not too bad at all.
So, no, which is great luxury, very enviable, very collectible, very exciting.
Dear.
And I think we've got to determine a value for it, because this is what the Antiques Roadshow is all
Dear.
about. I know it is, oh dear, isn't it?
Dear.
£5,000.
Oh dear.
Oh dear.
It used to sit in my mother's bedroom drawer
Yes.
by her bed, and I don't think she had any idea.
No. Oh,
No.
well, perhaps she
would
would
love
be
to.
thrilled to know.
She would.
Thank you so much for bringing it. It's been utterly brilliant.
Absolutely
Wonderful.
lovely. Thank you.
We've got two photographs here. One, clearly someone I do recognise, Queen Mary. What about these two?
Right, this is Great Aunt Gertrude and Great Uncle Percy.
And what's the story?
Well, the story is that Great Aunt Gertrude and Great Uncle Percy were driving from Hunstanton to Cambridge, and they were driving on the road and they saw this Rolls Royce which had broken down at the side of the road. And in 1934, at the end of January, cold day, obviously they stopped and said, "Can we help?" And the chauffeur got out and said, "Could you take the King and Queen into Cambridge for us, please?"
So it's the King and Queen inside
It
the
was the King
broken
and
down
Queen
roller.
in the broken down car, yes.
How they certainly must have. They must have been astonished.
Well, they were thrilled.
But this was hushed up, wasn't it?
They were asked not to say anything about it because they didn't want the royal family to be brought into it.
And who asked them to do that then?
Well, that was Ethel Desborough, from whom we got the letters there.
It's this letter here?
Yes, indeed.
Can I have a quick look?
Yes, of course.
So this is the Queen's lady-in-waiting writing to your...
Indeed.
This is addressed to dear Mrs. Titmuss from Sandringham. I'm commanded by the Queen to send this photograph of Her Majesty to you, Mr. Titmuss, with best wishes, as a memento of last Monday, exclamation mark. Oh, this is the good bit. I know that you will not mention this except privately to personal friends, as it is better that such a small, private matter should not get into the newspapers, as I know that you will understand. How marvellous. So that was a request for discretion.
Indeed.
And so this must have been a story they told privately, only to friends,
Only to
as
friends,
requested.
yes, yes.
But for many years, this is
Yeah.
family folklore, presumably.
Indeed, indeed. And then I inherited it all when, alas, she died.
Well, I hope you have it in pride of place in your house.
We do. She's always up. Queen Mary.
And have you ever had to stop and help someone by the roadside who's broken down?
No, I'm more likely to break down myself, I think, really.
This is an incredible looking piece of design, isn't it? It's rather shabby, though, I have to say. The covering on it is a little bit worn out. But I know that this sofa is designed by a very important French designer called Olivier Morgue.
That's right.
But I also know that this has an interesting story behind it, and I want you to explain that to me.
I've actually had the chair for probably about 12 years now, and my father inherited it from his father. It's from the film set of Stanley Kubrick's film Space Odyssey 2001.
Right.
And Victor Linden, who was the assistant producer to many of Stanley Kubrick's films,
Yes.
was like an uncle to my father,
Right.
and a really close member of the family, rescued it from after filming Big
The
Burn.
clear up. The Big Burn. Well, that's interesting,
Yes.
you say. As you mentioned the Big Burn, and what you're referring to, I know, is the fact that Kubrick, the director of 2001: A Space
Yes,
Odyssey,
yes.
didn't want any of these remarkably stylish objects to kind of be passed on, to have the look stolen, in effect. So he ordered it all destroyed. 1968, that film. It was a game changer in cinematic history. I remember the rotating space station and the blue Danube playing, and this is one of the sofas that was in those scenes.
This is one of the pink sofas
Right.
that was actually in the Hilton Hotel in the Sky.
Right.
And I
okay.
think there's actually literally only one
Right.
of the double chairs, which
Mhm.
he used lots of mirrors to look like there was many.
Right. Okay.
So that was one of, the effects.
But it's just such an organic but beautifully designed and fluid piece of furniture. And I think all of his designs of this type were groundbreaking in themselves. In this day and age, they're made of materials that are actually kind of difficult to deal with, quite inflammable and things. And there's lots of issues surrounding restoring and repairing furniture like this. But that's a problem, isn't it? What to do with it? To recover it in the right colour, or to leave it as it is? To me, it can never look quite like it did in the film unless it's the right colour. And, at the moment it's too drab.
Absolutely.
But I think it's got a great, impeccable history. Obviously, you've enjoyed it in a way. And I have to say, if I sat down every day on a sofa that was in a film like 2001: A Space Odyssey, I would never stop thinking about it, I don't think. It's connecting you to something really amazing. Now, I'm going to talk about values on it. It's very, very difficult to value, I have to say. So I'm going to be tentative about the estimate. I'm going to put 5,000 to 8,000 on it, which, I hopefully think is realistic. But who knows, if it comes up for sale one day, perhaps more. But I'm such a fan of science fiction. It's such a classic. Lovely to be in touch with something that's very close to that film. So thank you.
Thank you. That's amazing.
Sometimes we get objects which are interesting but have amazingly powerful resonances. This is an object which has, I think, staggering power, because I'm standing here holding Mallory's ice axe. Mallory and Irvine, the greatest names in Everest climbing, who knows? So how am I holding Mallory's ice axe?
Well, this ice axe was used on the attempted descent of Everest in 1922, and it was taken to a height of just under 27,000 feet. My mother and father were born in India, in Darjeeling and Calcutta, and my mother's father ran the Pines Hotel in Goom, just north of Darjeeling, and all of the climbers used to stay in his hotel, and he knew them all very well. And sometime after the 1922 expedition, it was given as a gift to my grandfather, along with a crampon, which my sister owns.
Isn't that astonishing? How many expeditions were there?
1921, there was an exploratory attempt on Everest, and the main expedition was in 1922.
Yes.
And then, of course, followed by the fateful ascent in 1924, which in June, which claimed both of their lives.
And that is the great mystery. Did they make it to the summit? Did they not? And to me, holding that, it all sort of comes to life. You're suddenly transported back to that extraordinary age. It's difficult to value. These things are one-offs. To a serious collector, this is an irreplaceable object. And so I think one would have to put a value of something like £5,000. It could be more. It's an irreplaceable object with an amazing history. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
For me, this is incredibly exciting because the only way you can own a watch like this is if you're a commercial diver working for the company Comex. So, are you a commercial diver? How did you come to getting the watch?
I had a boyfriend who was a deep-sea diver for the company Comex, and he gave it to me in like the late 80s. And I've just kept it since then, just in a drawer.
And so what made you pick it up and bring it in?
My cousin recently was watching a James Bond movie, Live and Let Die, and she saw this watch on Roger Moore's wrist in the movie, and she said, "Oh my goodness, Helen, that's your exact watch."
Well, it is indeed a classic James Bond watch, but it's not what makes this particular watch special. The thing that makes this particular watch special is the fact that it says Comex on the front, who were the French world-renowned deep-sea divers. They were involved with gas exploration, oil exploration, and what's special about this one is Rolex specifically made this watch to their specifications.
Yeah.
They didn't market this. This was never appeared in any Rolex catalogue.
Yeah.
We can date it to 1975, 1976. And what's so interesting about this watch and what makes it rare is it's got a helium gas release, because when you go so far down, the helium penetrates through the plastic.
Oh, yes.
And that's fine until you start to come up and it expands. And if you don't have that gas valve, the top pops off, you've lost your watch, you don't know how long you've been down, and it's a real life-threatening situation. So they produced this until Rolex themselves developed the watch, the Sea Dweller. But this watch is a very, very special watch.
Really?
Yeah. Sadly, yours is missing the bezel. But even with those imperfections, it's still at auction £20,000 to £30,000.
No. Did you say 1,000? Really?
Yeah. If it had the bezel,
yeah,
it would be more around 60,000. If you're still on good terms with the boyfriend,
yeah.
Paperwork, a diver's log, and maybe a photograph of him wearing it at the time, you could double it.
No. Never.
Worth a good phone call.
Yeah, but I can't share any of the money with him, can I?
You don't have to tell him. Your secret's safe with me, don't worry.
Many years ago, when I was learning about pottery, I was told this was the rabbit's pattern. And I just couldn't see it. It didn't dawn on me that these funny blobs are actually meant to be rabbits. This very naive, primitive style of painting makes one wonder just how old the plates themselves are. How long have they been in your family?
It's difficult to know. I would say easily 150 years.
So back really quite a long way, therefore.
I suspect so, yes.
Yes. I mean, because people have always wondered just when they were made. You get sort of what seems to be quite a modernist design, but the plates themselves are a little bit primitive. I mean, they're Delftware, and I mean that always has a bit of a primitive appearance. It was England's attempt at making the Chinese porcelain that was coming into Britain in the 1700s.
Right.
And they made imitations using pottery covered with this white glaze. And it was painted in various ways, but some of the most charming are a group we call the farmyard plates. And these were made in London.
Right.
There's various potteries along the Thames making these plates, and they would seem to be really quite early, but they don't look it. I mean, I suppose what strikes me most is the condition. Where have they been? Where do you keep them?
Well, they've been living in my mother's house, but they've been living in a glass-fronted cabinet, and no one's ever taken them out.
I mean, that must be it, because usually Delft plates were used. They were functional things. They got chipped, and chips and breaks are the norm. And to get a plate like that without a single chip, it shouldn't look like that. But here it is. I mean, there is a plate here, the nice and light, the thick double glaze, no foot rim. I mean, that's an early sign. That's typical of these so-called pancake plates. It's like a pancake has been just plopped onto a mould, and out comes the simple plate, and then it's been painted.
Right.
And this should date from about 1740. Right. So, I mean, all that age, and there's not a blemish on it. It's as it's new.
Right.
So, I mean, that's just the joy. It's just lasted. It's being kept in its cabinet, looked down in that way. It's survived in good shape, and not just one, but you've got two of them as well. I've never seen them together with the three colours of green, purple, and blue. Usually they're just in blue and white.
Right.
But here, London plates in such lovely shape. What do we think they're worth? Together, two almost perfect. A little chip just there, but let's forgive you that. One mint, one with a little chip. A pair, £1,200, £1,500.
Right. It does surprise me.
This is a gem of a picture. Absolute gem. When you look at this, you see the light on this little Dutch girl sitting on the coast, on her bonnet there, and it's signed on the bottom left, Gemmell Hutchinson. And it's Robert Gemmell Hutchinson. Do you know much about it?
I know that he was Scottish, but that's about it.
Well, it's very interesting. He was born in Edinburgh. He studied in Edinburgh, and he is a Scottish artist, born in 1855. And he always painted in this sort of impressionistic way, and certainly his later work was influenced by the Hague School of Artists in Holland, and they were the Dutch Impressionists.
Okay.
And Joseph Israels was the leader of that. How did you get it?
Well, it was given to my mother because I married a Dutch lady, and she thought that we ought to have it. So, yeah, that was about 20 years ago now.
It is a lovely picture. It's got everything I'd want in a Robert Gemmell Hutchinson, because it's all in this little picture. And I think if that came up for sale, it would make £5,000 to £7,000.
Wow. Wow, mate. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. That little thing like that. Cool.
Well, it's more than a little thing like that. It's
lovely.
a little gem.
Yeah.
Little gem.
Thank you very much.
I want you to tell me why you came today.
I came especially with this brooch because I wanted to know whether it was glass or whether it was real.
And this one?
And that one, was that also a piece of costume jewellery?
So where were these?
When my husband passed away, he used to collect lots of little trinkety things. He was a carpenter, and he just had this bag at the bottom of the wardrobe, and in a tobacco tin, in this tobacco tin were several little bits, and these were amongst it. Yeah.
So when you discovered these,
oh, I just thought they're not worth nothing. We wouldn't have anything that was worth any money. And then when I heard you were coming, I just said to my sister, oh, come on, let's go. So if we can find somewhere to park.
It's a good day out anyway. Excellent.
Yes.
Well, I'm very pleased that you came today.
Right.
I am more than very pleased. I am absolutely gobsmacked.
Right, gives me the collie wobbles, yeah.
So, you thought this one was glass, and you think this one's glass. You're right, one of them is glass.
Okay.
It's this one.
Okay.
This one is a 12-carat sapphire.
Okay.
But not only that, it is absolutely superb. The colour, the cut of it, and that, when I first saw that, it just absolutely popped out at me. And I just thought, wow, this is a wonderful stone. It has lots of inclusions inside, which are natural impurities in the stone, which is telling me where that stone might possibly have been mined. So I think it is from Sri Lanka. But it's the colour that has to speak to you, because you can get dark coloured sapphires that are actually quite sort of dull, and they don't have much life. This has a lot of life and a lot of fire. So this is in a setting with diamonds all around, and I think this would have been a ring.
Well, it's funny because I kept thinking if that was real, I'd have it like the royalties have got, like Diana's old ring. I was going to have it made, I was going to take it to a jeweller.
Do you know, I think I know where that's going to go after this show. So, it's about a 12 character, it's a beautiful colour, and I think at auction you'd be looking around £15,000.
Wow. Oh dear. Oh dear, it really makes me feel quite... Well, thank you very much.
And, well, it's gone to a good home. It's gone to a good home, and if you change it and make it into a ring, I think it would be a wonderful end to its journey for you to be able to wear it.
I'd be too frightened to wear it.
No, you must wear it. It's beautiful. It's stunning.
Okay, thank you all very, very much. I'm glad I've come.
So am I. It's the end of our day here at the Antiques Roadshow, and I'm just about to make my way home. And I've been handed what could be a very useful gadget. Now, we all know about sat-navs that we use in our cars these days, but this, we think, is the earliest example of a sat-nav, devised by a Cecil Fenn in the 1960s, who was fed up of being told instructions of where to turn left and right and what have you as he went on his journeys, and then forgetting them. So he came up with this. It's got these little wheels that turn. So the first instruction, that means turn right. If next you're at a roundabout and have to turn left, this is about traffic lights, then turn right at the traffic lights, and then take the third on the left. Genius. Quite what he did after the fourth instruction, I don't know. But nonetheless, back in the 1960s, not half bad. I might use it to get myself home. From the Antiques Roadshow here at Nymans, until next time, bye-bye.